She stood by the kitchen counter, scrolling her phone with one hand while her coffee cooled untouched. I had just mentioned a small errand I'd run the day before, nothing important, just returning a wrong-sized shirt I'd ordered online. She didn't even look up when she said it. You can't even keep your own orders straight, and you think you'd notice if something was really going on. Her tone was light enough to pass for teasing, but it landed like a stone dropped into a still pond. No smile, no glance, just her eyes locked on the screen. It was the kind of remark that, if you reacted, could be waved off as a joke. But I'd been married to her long enough to know when the words were barbed. I didn't answer. I just stood there for a second longer than felt natural, watching the faint curve of her lips that wasn't quite a smirk. Something in me went still, like a door closing quietly inside my chest. For years, I'd told myself her little jabs were just habit, the way some couples bicker without meaning harm. But this was different. There was weight in it, like she was daring me to challenge her. And beneath it, I heard something else, the faint outline of a truth she thought I'd never touch. I rinsed my mug and set it in the rack, my hands moving automatically. She didn't ask about my day, didn't mention the dinner we'd planned with friends next week. She just kept scrolling, thumb flicking in steady rhythm, her face empty of anything meant for me. I left the room without saying a word, but my mind kept replaying that single line. If something was really going on, you don't phrase things like that unless you've thought about it before, unless the thought has crossed your mind or your guilt. That afternoon, I tried to bury myself in small tasks, sorting mail, tightening the hinge on the back door, pulling a few weeds that had crept into the flower bed. But her voice kept cutting in, that cool dismissal wrapping around the words like insulation. The more I turned it over, the more I realized it wasn't about the shirt or the errand. It was about testing me, watching how I'd react. Over dinner, she asked if I'd remembered to defrost the chicken. I had, but the question came with a quick glance toward my hands, as if cataloging where I'd been. When I said yes, she gave a slight nod, not quite approval, not quite disbelief. It was a cataloging glance, the kind you give when you're keeping track for later. I noticed other small things that evening. Her phone never left her side, not even when she went to refill her water. She set it face down on the table, screen dark, but her hand hovered near it like she was waiting for a sound only she could hear. Later, when we sat on opposite ends of the couch, she laughed softly at something on her phone. I asked what it was. She said without looking up, "Just a friend sending something dumb." The word friend was too quick, too rehearsed, like she'd already tested it in her head. That night, as she brushed her teeth, I caught her watching me in the mirror, not warmly, but like someone measuring distance. She was careful to break eye contact before I could hold it. Lying in bed beside her, I stared at the ceiling while she scrolled under the covers, the faint glow lighting her face. Every so often, her thumb froze mid-swipe, as if she were thinking about whether to keep going. Then she'd lock the screen, roll over, and set the phone on the nightstand with the camera pointed toward the wall. It would have been easy to dismiss all of it as coincidence, but I've lived long enough to know the difference between noise and signal. And that day, the signal was strong enough to push through every layer of denial I'd built. I didn't question her. I didn't even let my expression change. I just made a quiet note to myself. Pay attention. Watch everything. By the time I drifted into shallow sleep, I wasn't thinking about the shirt I'd returned or the errands left on my list. I was thinking about her voice that morning, steady, dismissive, confident. The voice of someone who believed she was untouchable. And though I didn't yet know what I was looking for, I understood one thing with sudden clarity. Sooner or later, she would show me exactly what she meant. And when she did, I'd be ready. It happened 3 days later, almost by accident. I wasn't snooping, not in the way people imagine it, no rifling through drawers or guessing passwords. I've been trying to upload a photo from my phone to a shared album we used for family events. The cloud folder opened, and there it was, not just my pictures, but hers. At first, it was harmless stuff. A snapshot of her lunch with someone I didn't know, screenshots of recipes. But then I saw a different kind of image, a photo of an envelope on our kitchen counter. Not just any envelope. The return address was a law office 2 towns over, one I'd never heard her mention. The next picture was a scan of a document with our address at the top. The words were small, but I could make out enough. property division, marital assets, preliminary filing. My throat tightened, but my hand stayed still on the mouse. I clicked to the next image, a picture of her smiling in a restaurant booth, a glass of wine in front of her. Across the table, only a blurred edge of a man's sleeve was visible, but it wasn't mine. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. My first instinct was to tell myself there could be a reason. Maybe she was helping someone else. Maybe the man was a client or an old friend. But the document with our address, there was no innocent explanation for that. Scrolling further, I found screenshots of text messages. They were cropped, only showing her side of the conversation, but they didn't sound like work. Phrases like "once it's set up, I'll be covered," and "he won't see it coming" stood out in sharp relief. I closed the folder and sat there, feeling the air in the room turn heavy. This wasn't about distance anymore. This was about positioning, the kind you do before a move you know will hurt someone. When I saw her that evening, she was in the kitchen again, phone in hand. She glanced at me and asked, almost casually, "Did you get your photo uploaded?" I said I had, keeping my voice steady. She gave me a small smile, not warmth, just acknowledgement, and went back to her screen. That smile told me more than the documents had. She thought she knew the pace of the game we were in. She thought she was ahead. Over the next day, I checked the folder twice more. More images appeared, a bank statement I'd never seen, a screenshot of our joint account with certain transactions highlighted, a note in her handwriting photographed on a yellow legal pad, "Need him out before summer." Each new piece pulled the last bit of doubt out of me. She wasn't just becoming distant. She was laying groundwork. And some of the names in those messages, mutual friends, made it clear she wasn't doing it alone. That night, as she sat across from me at dinner, she asked if I'd remembered to RSVP for our neighbor's barbecue. I said I had. She nodded and took a sip of her wine, her eyes drifting over me like she was measuring a space she planned to empty. I didn't argue. I didn't let my breathing change. But inside, the shift was complete. The part of me that wanted to believe this was all a misunderstanding was gone. I understood the rules now. She was moving in silence. And so would I the next morning. I moved through the house like a careful tenant instead of a husband. She placed her phone face down on a folded napkin, as if it required gentler handling than I did. When it buzzed, she turned her shoulder toward the window and spoke in low tones, using he instead of my name, like I was a variable in a problem she'd already solved. I practiced a different kind of quiet, not the tired silence of long marriages, an observational stillness. On her social page, a sunset photo carried the caption, "Finding strength in storms." Her circle replied with hearts and lines about boundaries. At dinner with neighbors, she told a story about me forgetting to pay a bill. She left out that I corrected it that afternoon. Her laugh turned me into a gentle inconvenience. She patted my sleeve for the table's benefit, the gesture of a patient caretaker. I didn't correct anything. A new, unlabeled cloud folder appeared, hers. Screenshots weren't raw anger, they were tidied versions of us. "He's slipping. I'm carrying the weight. I may need to protect myself." Her friends replied on cue, "Proud of you. Stay strong." She wasn't only persuading them, she was steadying herself for the day someone asked what happened. That night I tested my memory the way she implied it was failing. I recited renewal dates and the mortgage rate under my breath. The practice wasn't for her, it was for the part of me she was working to soften. When she asked lightly, "Are you sure you didn't misplace that form?" I let the question hang. Not answering became a way to keep my balance. I began small withdrawals that left no fingerprints. I scanned critical papers, returned each sheet to its groove, and saved duplicates to a private drive. I photographed serial numbers in the garage and copied every warranty. At the bank, I asked about beneficiary designations for a friend, took the pamphlets, and read them in the car with the engine off. Her narrative kept building, a book with reclaiming my voice, a salad labeled choosing what nourishes, small things but reputations shift by degrees, not cliffs. A mutual friend messaged her, "How's he taking it?" Her reply, caught by the cloud, was theater. "He doesn't see the big picture." I smiled at the screen without humor. She began avoiding certain rooms for calls as if the walls could tattle. She took solitary walks, and when I offered to join once, lifted her water bottle toward the street and said, practiced and soft, "This one's for clearing my head." I nodded. She needed open space to rehearse the version of us where I had already left. To match her planning, I adjusted time. I opened a post office box, supposedly for a community newsletter. I created a new email behind a drab username and routed account alerts there. I backed up family videos onto a drive the size of a stick of gum and slid it into a thick book whose dust jacket hadn't moved in years. They weren't escapes. They were lines I could hold if the current changed. It became easy to occupy the role she wrote. If she needed me to forget, I allowed a beat before recalling the answer. If she needed me passive, I let the chair take a little more of my weight. I wasn't surrendering. I was gathering her confidence like dry leaves, waiting for the moment she'd try to light them. One evening she set a takeout bag on the counter with practiced cheer. She said, eyes on the bag, that she had grabbed something in case I hadn't eaten, and the same breath carried a request not to make her feel guilty. I thanked her and plated the food. She photographed the containers before we sat down. Self-care looks like knowing when not to cook. I kept a ledger, not of her actions, but of my restraint. The date I did not correct a story. The time I noticed a new passcode gesture and kept my hands folded. The morning I heard my name in a distant call and stayed put. Older men are told we're rigid. My ledger proved I could be patient without bending the wrong way. Hints of her people showed at the margins. A mutual friend asked whether I was getting support. Another, 2 glasses into a neighborhood party, held my shoulder and said, "We're here for both of you," with the careful tone of someone instructed to stay neutral. Neutrality, when a story is being staged, sounds like applause with the volume turned down. I walked through each room and looked at objects the way an insurer does. Replaceable or not. Sentimental or not. I moved my father's pocket knife to the workshop and slid our wedding album into a box that would travel if it had to. I wasn't leaving. I was acknowledging that plans were being drafted around me. The night before I stopped wearing my ring, she sat on the edge of the bed and asked if I was feeling withdrawn. The word was careful, like something a counselor handed her. I folded my glasses, set them down, and said I'd been thinking. She nodded as if I'd granted permission for her own distance. When she turned to plug in her phone, the screen flashed a message preview from a name saved without a last initial. It faded before I could read the rest. I didn't lean closer. By then the disconnect was complete. She believed she was performing an exit in a house of sleeping witnesses. I was awake in the back row, studying the fire map. I didn't need to stop the show. I only needed to know where the doors were and who would be holding them when the lights changed. The first step was almost invisible. I switched the auto pay for our utilities from the joint account to one in my name alone. A change small enough not to trigger a notice, but enough to make the paper trail cleaner when the time came. I told her the bank had updated their system and I had to adjust things. She didn't question it. From there, the withdrawals became a rhythm. I scanned our last 10 years of tax returns, storing them on an encrypted drive. I contacted the insurance company, updating the primary mailing address to my P.O. box for efficiency. At the hardware store, I bought a travel bag under the pretense of a fishing trip and filled it with the essentials I wouldn't want left behind. All the while, she kept the performance going. A new social post. Sometimes you have to protect your peace. The comments rolled in, sympathy from people who'd known us for decades. Some of them had stood in my garage drinking my beer, and now they were liking her side of a story that didn't exist yet. The friend's mistake came on a Thursday. My phone buzzed with a message, but the preview wasn't from anyone in my contacts. It was a screenshot, a string of messages clearly meant for her, not me. The friend was venting about a plan getting messy and him probably buying it for now. In the middle was a photo, my wife at dinner with the same man from the blurred restaurant sleeve in the cloud. His hand rested on hers. I saved the image, then the thread. When I checked the cloud later, there was more a scanned declaration draft, complete with phrases about my emotional instability and financial neglect. She debuilt an entire character out of me, one she could dismantle in court if she needed to. That night she came home humming, a paper bag of groceries in her arms. She said she'd picked up my favorite bread because "you've seemed off lately and I want to take care of you." I thanked her, letting my voice carry just enough gratitude to keep her certain I was still going along with things. The next day, I opened a separate safe deposit box. I moved in copies of everything: the documents from the cloud, the screenshot from her friend, my financial records. I added a USB drive holding video clips I'd quietly pulled from our home security camera. The footage didn't show everything, but it showed enough. The days she'd left in one outfit and returned in another, the times she'd staged photos in the living room with props that vanished minutes later. She didn't know I'd turned the guest room into my staging ground. In a box labeled Old Linens sat my organized files, the bag, and a typed log of every date, time, and image. I left the door open so she could glance in and see nothing but folded sheets. 2 weeks later, she mentioned, almost idly, that she might be out one night next month for a friend's birthday. She didn't say which friend. I said that was fine. She smiled like a chess player moving a pawn. I let her believe she was playing alone. I had already backed up the key video, the one that tied her public image to the private reality, to 3 locations. The evening before her birthday dinner, she scrolled on the couch while I sat with a book. She asked if I needed anything from the store. I said no. Her eyes flicked to the clock, then back to the phone. She was thinking about the next day, so was I, but for different reasons. By then the exit was already in motion. The accounts were shifted, the documents secure, the proof archived. All that was left was to wait for her to walk into the ending she'd written, without realizing it was never hers to control. By the time she returned from her birthday dinner, the video had already been sent. Not to everyone, just to the right people. A short, clear clip from our own security camera. Her in the driveway, greeting him with both arms, the kind of embrace you don't mistake for friendship. I didn't send it with captions or accusations, just the file. No commentary means no room for her to reframe it as something else. People can decide for themselves what they're seeing. She didn't say anything that night. But by morning, the shift had started. Her phone buzzed repeatedly over breakfast, and she stopped answering on the first ring. Scrolled without tapping like on anything, eyes tight. 2 days later, she posted a photo of a coffee cup on a rainy windowsill. The caption: "Some storms come without warning." The comments were a mixed bag, a few of her loyal friends telling her to stay strong, others asking if she was okay. One simply wrote, "I saw." Invitations stopped appearing. The couple from 2 streets over canceled a dinner she'd arranged. A neighbor who used to chat with her during morning walks waved from a distance instead. Her own friend, the one who'd sent me the screenshot by mistake, stopped by to check in. I didn't join them in the kitchen, but I could hear the edge in my wife's voice. They didn't stay long. She tried to rally online, shared a memory from years ago, captioned it with "better days." But the comments were mostly quiet, and a few likes trickled in from people who didn't know us well enough to matter. A week later, she came home visibly unsettled. She asked if I'd told anyone about our private matters. I said calmly that I hadn't, which was true. I hadn't told them. I'd shown them. She began pulling back from her own social circle, perhaps trying to control the leaks. Calls got shorter. The long coffee meetups ended. One evening, she sat on the couch scrolling her messages over and over, the same expression you wear when you're checking if the damage has stopped spreading. The silence around her grew thicker. People she used to count on for public support simply stopped engaging. One old friend sent her a single message: "You should talk to him before this gets worse." She didn't show me, but I saw the preview flash across her phone when she set it down too quickly. I didn't take any victory from it. That wasn't the point. The unraveling didn't need my commentary. It was happening on its own, from the inside out. Some evenings she tried to start conversations at dinner, as if she could reset us to a version that existed months earlier. I kept my responses even, polite, uncommitted. The kind of answers that neither invited nor denied. The performance was collapsing, and she knew it. The part she hadn't anticipated was that I wasn't going to give her a scene to rally against. She had shaped the story expecting me to challenge it. But without that, all she had left was the quiet space where people used to believe her. And that space was getting bigger every day. The certified envelope arrived on a Tuesday, stamped with the county seal. She turned it over at the counter, thumb braced on the flap like pressure could hold the day shut. She didn't ask what it was. She knew. The recorder's notice confirmed my alert. No title or debt could move in my name without my written consent. The quiet door I'd closed had become a locked gate. I crossed out 2 final lines in my ledger: freeze the joint line, route statements to the P.O. box. Finished. It didn't feel like triumph, only completion. Numbers balanced, steps checked. Her phone lit with the same first name I'd seen in the cloud. She carried it to the hallway and pressed her shoulder to the wall to keep her voice low. When she came back, the envelope was still unopened. She set it down and measured me. "We should talk," she said, careful, like wording a caption. I slid the ledger into a drawer and stood. The conversation she wanted belonged to a version of us that no longer existed. Behind the scenes, the reversal finished itself. My banker confirmed beneficiaries and sent a routine note, plain language, no drama. The county system posted my objection to unilateral changes. The mediator I'd retained sent her a calendar invite with a line that couldn't be spun. Documentation already exchanged. She had drafted a tale where I was forgetful and she was the caretaker. Paper did not support theater. That night she tested her stage. A filtered street photo, caption processing. Comments were thin. One neighbor replied, "Hope you two handle this privately." Another wrote, "Saw the clip." She didn't answer either. Her attorney called the next morning, voice dry. No filings on their end. A suggestion to pursue a simple division and avoid claims that couldn't be supported. The email that followed said the same thing with more words. The message was clear. The plans she'd set in motion would not stand. Before lunch, her screen flashed with the man's name. The preview read, "I can't be involved." She turned the phone face down too quickly. The spoon rattled in her mug. Some exits don't slam, they leave a mark like a chair on carpet. I packed what I had already chosen weeks earlier. The drives, the binder, my father's pocket knife, 2 changes of clothes. I left the furniture and almost all the pictures. This wasn't flight. It was a measured step outside the script. On the counter, I placed 2 keys and the garage remote in a plain envelope with today's date. No note. A messenger delivered her stack at noon. She spread the pages on the table, lips moving as she read. I saw the moment she reached the notarized timeline. Dates, exhibits, index numbers pointing to the cloud logs, the friend's mistaken screenshot, the driveway clip. She lifted her eyes, calculation replacing performance. She approached with empty hands. "We can fix this," she said, borrowing the voice that used to soothe. I picked up my bag. At the doorway she set her palm on the frame, more gesture than barrier. "If you leave, you'll make me look like the one who broke it," she said, dressed as concern. It was also admission. Image mattered more than repair. I placed a small flash drive on the foyer table and nodded toward the stack. She followed my glance, saw the file name matching the index, and let her hand fall. Nothing further needed air. I drove to the short-term place I'd arranged and sent a final note to the mediator. "Ready when she is," attached to the folder of everything required. No adjectives. Paper carries farther than tone. Then I turned my phone face down and let silence work. Near dusk, 3 measured knocks came at the new door. I stayed seated. The knocks returned, softer, then stopped. 2 calls followed, then a message. "Can we please talk?" I watched the bubble fade and left the phone on the table. Neighbors will settle on their own histories. Some will say we drifted. Some will say I gave up. None of that changes what sits in 2 offices and 3 drives. Agreement isn't needed, only the record. Later, the outside camera, still active, pushed a clip. She stood on our porch, lifted her hand to knock, then lowered it, shoulders gathered like the air had cooled. The clip ended. For once, no caption tried to steer it. In the morning, I returned only to finish my list. She sat at the dining table with an open notebook and a pen resting on a clean page. She didn't speak. I took the hidden drive from the book's spine, the folder from the guest room, and the framed photo of my mother's garden. At the threshold, I set the spare mailbox key beside yesterday's envelope of house keys. No speech. A line can be drawn without ink. I pulled the door shut. The latch caught, small, final. Somewhere behind it, she remained with what she had built. A circle thinning, invitations evaporating, a calendar with more white than plans. The video will exist whether watched or not. The documents will sit in their files whether discussed or denied. I walked down the steps, the travel bag light on my shoulder, and started the car. The street carried only forward traffic. I did not look back. That is the ending. She stays with the damage. I do not open the door.